Chapter 8 of The People of the Abyss. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Peter Yearsley. The People of the Abyss by Jack London. Chapter 8. The Carter and the Carpenter. The Carter, with his clean-cut face, chin-beard, and shaved upper lip, I should have taken in the United States for anything from a master workman to a well-to-do farmer. The Carpenter, well, I should have taken him for a carpenter. He looked it, lean and wiry, with shrewd, observant eyes, and hands that had grown twisted to the handles of tools through 47 years' work at the trade. The chief difficulty with these men was that they were old, and that their children, instead of growing up to take care of them, had died. Their years had told on them, and they had been forced out of the whirl of industry by the younger and stronger competitors who had taken their places. These two men, turned away from the casual ward of Whitechapel workhouse, were bound with me for Poplar workhouse. Not much of a show, they thought, but to chance it was all that remained to us. It was Poplar or the streets and night. Both men were anxious for a bed, for they were about gone, as they phrased it. The Carter, 58 years of age, had spent the last 3 nights without shelter or sleep, while the Carpenter, 65 years of age, had been out 5 nights. But, oh dear, soft people, full of meat and blood, with white beds and airy rooms waiting you each night, how can I make you know what it is to suffer as you would suffer if you spent a weary night on London's streets? Believe me, you would think 1,000 centuries had come and gone before the east paled into dawn. You would shiver till you were ready to cry aloud with the pain of each aching muscle, and you would marvel that you could endure so much and live. Should you rest upon a bench and your tired eyes close, depend upon it, the policeman would rouse you and gruffly order you to move on. You may rest upon the bench, and benches are few and far between, but if rest means sleep, on you must go, dragging your tired body through the endless streets. Should you, in desperate slyness, seek some forlorn alley or dark passageway and lie down, the omnipresent policeman will rout you out just the same. It is his business to rout you out. It is a law of the powers that be that you shall be routed out. But when the dawn came, the nightmare over, you would hale you home to refresh yourself, and until you died you would tell the story of your adventure to groups of admiring friends. It would grow into a mighty story. Your little 8-hour night would become an Odyssey, and you a Homer. Not so with these homeless ones who walked to Poplar workhouse with me, and there are 35,000 of them, men and women, in London town this night. Please don't remember it as you go to bed. If you are as soft as you ought to be, you may not rest so well as usual. But for old men of 60, 70, and 80, ill-fed, with neither meat nor blood, to greet the dawn unrefreshed, and to stagger through the day in mad search for crusts, with relentless night rushing down upon them again, and to do this 5 nights and days. Oh dear soft people, full of meat and blood, how can you ever understand? I walked up Mile End Road between the Carter and the Carpenter. Mile End Road is a wide thoroughfare cutting the heart of East London, and there were tens of thousands of people abroad on it. I tell you this so that you may fully appreciate what I shall describe in the next paragraph. As I say, we walked along, and when they grew bitter and cursed the land, I cursed with them, cursed as an American waif would curse, stranded in a strange and terrible land. And as I tried to lead them to believe, and succeeded in making them believe, they took me for a seafaring man, who had spent his money in riotous living, lost his clothes (no unusual occurrence with seafaring men ashore), and was temporarily broke while looking for a ship. This accounted for my ignorance of English ways in general, and casual wards in particular, and my curiosity concerning the same. The Carter was hard put to keep the pace at which we walked. He told me that he had eaten nothing that day. But the carpenter, lean and hungry, his grey and ragged overcoat flapping mournfully in the breeze, swung on in a long and tireless stride, which reminded me strongly of the plains wolf or coyote. Both kept their eyes upon the pavement as they walked and talked, and every now and then one or the other would stoop and pick something up, never missing the stride the while. I thought it was cigar and cigarette stumps they were collecting, and for some time took no notice. Then I did notice. From the slimy, spittle-drenched sidewalk they were picking up bits of orange peel, apple skin, and grape stems, and they were eating them. The pits of green-gage plums they cracked between their teeth for the kernels inside. They picked up stray bits of bread the size of peas, apple cores so black and dirty one would not take them to be apple cores, and these things these two men took into their mouths and chewed them and swallowed them, and this between 6 and 7 o'clock in the evening of August the 20th, year of our Lord 1902, in the heart of the greatest, wealthiest, and most powerful empire the world has ever seen. These two men talked. They were not fools, they were merely old, and naturally their guts a-reek with pavement offal. They talked of bloody revolution. They talked as anarchists, fanatics, and madmen would talk, and who shall blame them? In spite of my 3 good meals that day, and the snug bed I could occupy if I wished, and my social philosophy, and my evolutionary belief in the slow development and metamorphosis of things, in spite of all this, I say, I felt impelled to talk rot with them, or hold my tongue. Poor fools! Not of their sort are revolutions bred, and when they are dead and dust, which will be shortly, other fools will talk bloody revolution, as they gather offal from the spittle-drenched sidewalk along Mile End Road to Poplar Workhouse. Being a foreigner and a young man, the carter and the carpenter explained things to me and advised me. Their advice, by the way, was brief and to the point. It was to get out of the country. "As fast as God'll let me," I assured them. "I'll hit only the high places, till you won't be able to see my trail for smoke." They felt the force of my figures rather than understood them, and they nodded their heads approvingly. "Actually make a man a criminal against his will," said the carpenter. "Here I am, old, younger men taking my place, my clothes getting shabbier and shabbier, and making it harder every day to get a job. I go to the casual ward for a bed. Must be there by 2 or 3 in the afternoon or I won't get in. You saw what happened today. What chance does that give me to look for work? Suppose I do get into the casual ward. Keep me in all day tomorrow, let me out morning of next day. What then? The law says I can't get in another casual ward that night, less than 10 miles distant. Have to hurry and walk to be there in time that day. What chance does that give me to look for a job? Suppose I don't walk. Suppose I look for a job. In no time there's night come, and no bed. No sleep all night. Nothing to eat. What shape am I in the morning to look for work? Got to make up my sleep in the park somehow." The vision of Christ's Church, Spitalfield, was strong on me. And get something to eat. And there I am, old, down, and no chance to get up. "Used to be a toll gate here," said the carter. "Many's the time I've paid my toll here, in my carting days." "I've had 3 halfpenny rolls in 2 days," the carpenter announced, after a long pause in the conversation. "2 of them I ate yesterday, and the 3rd today," he concluded, after another long pause. "I ain't had anything to-day," said the carter, "and I'm fagged out. My legs is hurting me something fearful." "The roll you get in the spike is that hard you can't eat it nicely with less than a pint of water," said the carpenter for my benefit, and on asking him what the spike was, he answered, "The casual ward. It's a cant word, you know." But what surprised me was that he should have the word cant in his vocabulary, a vocabulary that I found was no mean one before we parted. I asked them what I might expect in the way of treatment if we succeeded in getting into the Poplar Workhouse, and between them I was supplied with much information. Having taken a cold bath on entering, I would be given for supper 6 ounces of bread and 3 parts of skilly. 3 parts means 3/4 of a pint, and skilly is a fluid concoction of 3 quarts of oatmeal stirred into 3 buckets and a half of hot water. Milk and sugar, I suppose, and a silver spoon?" I queried. "No fear, salt's what you'll get, and I've seen some places where you'd not get any spoon. Hold her up and let her run down, that's how they do it." "You do get good skilly at Hackney," said the Carter. "Oh, wonderful skilly, that," praised the Carpenter, and each looked eloquently at the other. "Flour and water at St. George's in the east," said the Carter. The Carpenter nodded. He had tried them all. "Then what?" I demanded, and I was informed that I was sent directly to bed. "Call you at 5:30 in the morning, and you get up and take a sluice, if there's any soap. Then breakfast, same as supper, 3 parts of skilly and a 6-ounce loaf." "'Tisn't always 6 ounces," corrected the Carter. "'Tisn't, no, and often that's sour, you can hardly eat it. When first I started I couldn't eat the skilly nor the bread, but now I can eat my own and another man's portion." "I could eat 3 other men's portions," said the Carter. "I haven't had a bit this blessed day." "Then what?" "Then you've got to do your task, pick 4 pounds of oakum, or clean and scrub, or break 10 to 1100 weight of stones. I don't have to break stones, I'm past 60, you see. They'll make you do it, though. You're young and strong." "What I don't like," grumbled the Carter, "is to be locked up in a cell to pick oakum. It's too much like prison." "But suppose after you've had your night's sleep you refuse to pick oakum, or break stones, or do any work at all?" I asked. "No fear you'll refuse the second time. They'll run you in," answered the Carpenter. "Wouldn't advise you to try it on, my lad. Then comes dinner," he went on. 8 ounces of bread, 1½ ounces of cheese, and cold water. Then you finish your task and have supper, same as before, 3 parts of skilly and 6 ounces of bread. Then to bed, 6 o'clock, and next morning you're turned loose, provided you've finished your task. We had long since left Mile End Road, and after traversing a gloomy maze of narrow, winding streets, we came to Poplar Workhouse. On a low stone wall we spread our handkerchiefs, and each in his handkerchief put all his worldly possessions, with the exception of the bit of baccy down his sock. And then, as the last light was fading from the drab-coloured sky, the wind blowing cheerless and cold, we stood with our pitiful little bundles in our hands, a forlorn group at the workhouse door. 3 working girls came along, and one looked pityingly at me. As she passed, I followed her with my eyes, and she still looked pityingly back at me. The old men she did not notice. Dear Christ! She pitied me, young and vigorous and strong, but she had no pity for the 2 old men who stood by my side. She was a young woman, and I was a young man, and what vague sex promptings impelled her to pity me put her sentiment on the lowest plane. Pity for old men is an altruistic feeling, and besides, the workhouse door is the accustomed place for old men. So she showed no pity for them, only for me, who deserved it least or not at all. Not in honour do grey hairs go down to the grave in London town. On one side the door was a bell handle, on the other side a press button. "Ring the bell," said the Carter to me, and just as I ordinarily would at anybody's door, I pulled out the handle and rang a peal. "Oh, oh!" they cried in one terrified voice. "Not so hard!" I let go, and they looked reproachfully at me, as though I had imperilled their chance for a bed and 3 parts of skilly. Nobody came. Luckily it was the wrong bell, and I felt better. "Press the button," I said to the Carpenter. No, wait a bit," the Carter hurriedly interposed. From all of which I drew the conclusion that a poorhouse porter, who commonly draws a yearly salary of from £7 to £9, is a very finicky and important personage, and cannot be treated too fastidiously by paupers. So we waited 10 times a decent interval, when the Carter stealthily advanced a timid forefinger to the button, and gave it the faintest, shortest possible push. I have looked at waiting men where life or death was in the issue, but anxious suspense showed less plainly on their faces than it showed on the faces of these 2 men as they waited on the coming of the porter. He came. He barely looked at us. "Full up," he said, and shut the door. "Another night of it," groaned the Carpenter. In the dim light the Carter looked wan and grey. "Indiscriminate charity is vicious," say the professional philanthropists. Well, I resolved to be vicious. "Come on, get your knife out and come here," I said to the Carter, drawing him into a dark alley. He glared at me in a frightened manner, and tried to draw back. Possibly he took me for a latter-day Jack the Ripper, with a penchant for elderly male paupers. Or he may have thought I was inveigling him into the commission of some desperate crime. Anyway, he was frightened. It will be remembered at the outset that I sewed a pound inside my stoker's singlet under the armpit. This was my emergency fund, and I was now called upon to use it for the first time. Not until I had gone through the acts of a contortionist and shown the round coin sewed in did I succeed in getting the carter's help. Even then his hand was trembling so that I was afraid he would cut me instead of the stitches, and I was forced to take the knife away and do it myself. Out rolled the gold piece, a fortune in their hungry eyes, and away we stampeded for the nearest coffee-house. Of course, I had to explain to them that I was merely an investigator, a social student, seeking to find out how the other half lived, and at once they shut up like clams. I was not of their kind. My speech had changed, the tones of my voice were different. In short, I was a superior, and they were superbly class-conscious. "What will you have?" I asked, as the waiter came for the order. "2 slices and a cup of tea," meekly said the carter. "2 slices and a cup of tea," meekly said the carpenter. Stop a moment and consider the situation. Here were 2 men invited by me into the coffee-house. They had seen my gold piece, and they could understand that I was no pauper. One had eaten a halfpenny roll that day, the other had eaten nothing, and they called for 2 slices and a cup of tea. Each man had given a twopenny order. 2 slices, by the way, means 2 slices of bread and butter. This was the same degraded humility that had characterized their attitude towards the poorhouse porter. But I wouldn't have it. Step by step I increased their order. Eggs, rashers of bacon, more bacon, more tea, more slices, and so forth, they denying wistfully all the while that they cared for anything more, and devouring it ravenously as fast as it arrived. "First cup of tea I've had in a fortnight," said the carter. "Wonderful tea, that," said the carpenter. They each drank 2 pints of it, and I assure you that it was slops. It resembled tea less than lager beer resembles champagne. Nay, it was water bewitched, and did not resemble tea at all. It was curious after the first shock to notice the effect the food had on them. At first they were melancholy, and talked of the diverse times they had contemplated suicide. The carter, not a week before, had stood on the bridge and looked at the water, and pondered the question. Water, the carpenter insisted with heat, was a bad route. He, for one, he knew, would struggle. A bullet was handier, but how under the sun was he to get hold of a revolver? That was the rub. They grew more cheerful as the hot tea soaked in, and talked more about themselves. The carter had buried his wife and children, with the exception of one son, who grew to manhood and helped him in his little business. Then the thing happened. The son, a man of 31, died of the smallpox. No sooner was this over than the father came down with fever and went to the hospital for 3 months. Then he was done for. He came out weak, debilitated, no strong young son to stand by him, his little business gone glimmering, and not a farthing. The thing had happened, and the game was up. No chance for an old man to start again. Friends all poor and unable to help. He had tried for work when they were putting up the stands for the first coronation parade. And I got fair sick of the answer, "No, no, no." It rang in my ears at night when I tried to sleep, always the same, "No, no, no." Only the past week he had answered an advertisement in Hackney, and on giving his age was told, "Oh, too old by far." The carpenter had been born in the army, where his father had served 22 years. Likewise his 2 brothers had gone into the army, one troop sergeant major of the 7th Hussars, dying in India after the mutiny. The other, after 9 years under Roberts in the East, had been lost in Egypt. The carpenter had not gone into the army, so here he was, still on the planet. "But here, give me your hand," he said, ripping open his ragged shirt. "I'm fit for the anatomist, that's all. I'm wasting away, sir, actually wasting away for want of food. Feel my ribs and you'll see." I put my hand under his shirt and felt. The skin was stretched like parchment over the bones, and the sensation produced was for all the world like running one's hand over a washboard. 7 years of bliss I had. he said. "A good missus and 3 bonny lassies, but they all died. Scarlet fever took the girls inside a fortnight." "After this, sir," said the Carter, indicating the spread and desiring to turn the conversation into more cheerful channels, "after this I wouldn't be able to eat a workhouse breakfast in the morning." "Nor I," agreed the Carpenter, and they fell to discussing belly delights and the fine dishes their respective wives had cooked in the old days. "I've gone 3 days and never broke my fast," said the Carter. "And I 5," his companion added, turning gloomy with the memory of it. "5 days once, with nothing on my stomach but a bit of orange peel, and outraged nature wouldn't stand it, sir, and I near died. Sometimes walking the streets at night I've been that desperate I've made up my mind to win the horse or lose the saddle. You know what I mean, sir, to commit some big robbery. But when morning come, there was I, too weak from hunger and cold to harm a mouse." As their poor vitals warmed to the food, they began to expand and wax boastful, and to talk politics. I can only say that they talked politics as well as the average middle-class man, and a great deal better than some of the middle-class men I have heard. What surprised me was the hold they had on the world, its geography and peoples, and on recent and contemporaneous history. As I say, they were not fools, these 2 men. They were merely old, and their children had undutifully failed to grow up and give them a place by the fire. One last incident. As I bade them good-bye on the corner, happy with a couple of shillings in their pockets and the certain prospect of a bed for the night, lighting a cigarette, I was about to throw away the burning match, when the Carter reached for it. I proffered him the box, but he said, "Never mind, won't waste it, sir." And while he lighted the cigarette I had given him, the Carpenter hurried with the filling of his pipe in order to have a go at the same match. "It's wrong to waste," said he. "Yes," I said, but I was thinking of the washboard ribs over which I had run my hand. End of chapter 8.